Rules were meant to be followed, but not without spice. I'm DJ Reez, with compliance so malicious it's nice. Boss's boss threatens to fire me. I accept and get himself and his friends fired. Posted by Warrior44. This whole story happened in 2021 and ended in October. Time really does fly, and it's something that puts a Cheshire smile on my face. Warning, this is a very extensive story, so grab some popcorn. Background, ignore if you like. In January 2021, I began working for a very large American company in Europe that was, and still is, in the energy sector. At the factory plant where I started, parts of gas turbines were assessed for restoration and reworked so they could be used again. Each individual part would cost several thousand when produced new and would last for about a decade or so. Reworking cost about 1/4 of that, and the part would be good for another 8 to 10 years. With more inspections, of course, for safety. Customers would pay about half the cost of a new part, and since we're talking 2 to 8K per single part with a gas turbine containing thousands of pieces, we're discussing several million for each gas turbine. Customers would save a significant amount, and the company was essentially sitting on a gold mine. Over the decades, this meant that the facility where the items were reworked had a consistent and uncontested income. There wasn't much competition since the parts were their own design and production, creating a win-win for both the customer and the company. Over time, this led to a situation where competence, innovation, and even honesty were no longer priorities for the management of the facility. As long as the workers adhered to the already developed and tested processes and did their job, money would keep flowing in, regardless of what the office did or didn't do. You can probably see where this is going. Setup, somewhat important. I was hired as part of quality control. Specifically, I was to operate a 3D computer-managed measuring machine. Gas turbines, as you can imagine, get very hot and spin quickly. A decade of heat combined with dynamic stress tends to deform things. It's crucial to measure these parts very precisely so that production knows which section of which piece needs reworking, or if a piece is too deformed to be used again. Operating such a machine isn't too complicated. You place the piece into a bracket, clamp it down, load the correct model, and start the program. You then receive the measurement report as a text file, an Excel file, and a PDF. The pieces, usually rotary blades, almost always came in sets, ranging from 24 to 216 depending on the size. Once all are measured, you compile all the reports the machine made into one Excel file using a somewhat complicated method. It wasn't hard. I learned it all in a week. This machine was immensely important for the facility, running in 2-3 shifts per day, 6 days a week. About 80% of all pieces that went through the reworking process had to be measured at least twice. As almost anyone with a technical background can guess, operating a machine and understanding its inner workings are two very different things. When I started, there were only 3 guys who understood the machine properly, as well as a technician named Vladimir, who could fix codes or reprogram a 3D model if there was an issue. Vladimir, however, was the technician for the entire facility, a very busy guy. When he had to come over, his time would be billed to the department, something the bosses weren't too keen on. Of the 3 guys who knew the machine, Antonio is noteworthy. He had been working there for what seemed like centuries, knew every nook and cranny, and while being a simple worker, he was the go-to guy when things went south. He had a bit of a short temper and a very blunt way of speaking, but he was honest, straightforward, and very fair. I myself am not the most social person. I'm reserved, brutally honest, and perhaps take my professional cold demeanor a bit too seriously. In general, if people share my principles of honesty, fairness, and responsibility, we get along great. But with those who are less trustworthy, I essentially become an ice block. It's not perfect, I know, but there's a reason I don't work in retail. So the thing is, despite some heated arguments, Antonio and I really got along swimmingly. What no one knew was that Antonio had, over the decades, accumulated such a backlog of days off, overtime, and whatnot that he could retire 2 years early, and he was 63. He had decided to groom me as his successor and began teaching me every little detail about the measuring machine, how to fix things, how to do proper maintenance, why it behaved in certain ways, and so on. He was a perfectionist, and so am I, so I really appreciated it. What I noticed in my first week at the company was its biggest problem. The facility had a massive issue with cliques, clans, and little circles. If you were part of the right clique, You could do whatever you wanted and remain untouchable. If you weren't, your credit would go to anyone but you, and you'd be the perfect scapegoat. I honestly didn't care much about it. I'm a bit of a rule fanatic and stick to them even when everyone else ignores them. For me, this was a well-paying job with a horrible commute, 1 3/4 hours in one direction. I wanted to stay there as long as I could, earn my money, and then move on to the next job. There was a fourth guy who was operating the machine. I don't remember his name, so let's call him Igor. Igor was part of the same clique as my boss, Manuel, my boss's boss, Freddie, and of course his own boss, Boris, who was also his brother. He worked on the measuring machine simply because it was the most comfortable job he could perform. He usually did the night shift as those paid extra. Occasionally he took the late shift while I always took the early one. It was the least popular due to starting at 6 a.m., but I liked going home at 3 p.m. Igor was, well, to describe his brightness, he was like a wet match in a dark basement located in a black hole. I might be a bit too harsh with this description, but that was all I ever saw of him. He was also quite lazy, rude, and arrogant, given his untouchable status due to his brother's best friend being the head of the entire assessment department. The actual story. Long build-up, I know. About 6 months after I started, there was the first incident with the measuring machine. We received material on pallets, and it was a firm rule that the rotary blades had to be sorted in numerical order. Each had a serial number and a set number. Things went much faster and smoother if everything was neatly sorted, say, from 1 to 82, or whatever the set went up to. Occasionally, an order, which usually consisted of 2 to 4 pallets, would arrive at the measuring machine unsorted, and then we'd have to sort them. Since we had to lift the blades out one by one anyway to measure them, it wasn't a huge deal, just a tad bit annoying. Igor never finished a set if he could help it, leaving just 1 or 2 blades left for measuring. Even when he had to finish a set and start a new one, he would never compile the reports into one Excel file. I'm pretty sure he didn't even know how that worked. One morning I came to work, and as often was the case, there were just 3 blades left to measure. I shrugged it off and wanted to just finish the order and start the next. The problem was the pallets were a complete mess, entirely unsorted, despite them being measured. Igor had worked the late shift the day before, and would also work the late shift that day, so I would actually see him for a few minutes during the shift handover. This meant that I would have to sort all of the pallets while also operating the machine with the next order to avoid a delay. The machine was a bit of a bottleneck in the facility. Usually this is a relaxed position. The blades are never heavier than 22 kilograms, roughly 48 pounds, and you have about 6 to 14 minutes between measurement cycles to lift them out and replace them with the last measured blade. Sorting the previous order took me 2 hours of rather sweaty work while also operating the machine nearby, so I was somewhat annoyed. When Igor came in the afternoon, I asked him politely why he hadn't sorted that one order. He replied in a rather rude tone that he wouldn't do that. I was a bit baffled and asked if he wasn't aware that it was mandatory to do so. He simply replied, again in a rude tone, that he didn't want to discuss it, outright refusing to address a problem. What the hell? I told him that if he didn't want to discuss it, I would have to bring it up with my boss. He just smiled smugly and told me to go ahead. So I did just that. I approached my boss about it, framing it as, "Hey, I thought we were supposed to sort this stuff. Has there been a change?" This led to a 4-way discussion with my boss, Igor, and Boris. Boris was not pleased at all, and my boss seemed rather embarrassed. It was clear that I was correct, but neither of them wanted to admit that their friend had done anything wrong. I maintained my usual icy demeanor, showing a blank face, responding in precise and concise terms, and staying polite and professional. The meeting concluded rather inconclusively with a gentle request that we should please sort the pallets if they arrived in a mess. Igor just shrugged, making it clear he didn't care. It happened 3 more times that items arrived unsorted, but Igor always managed to avoid dealing with it. Alrighty then. Strike 1 of 3. 6 weeks later, there was the second incident. Every morning before I started, I would maintain the machine as Antonio had shown me, cleaning everything and applying a special liquid to the stone tread that the machine's arch ran back and forth on. One morning, I came in and switched the machine to manual mode as I did every day so that I could move the arch to the end of the tread for maintenance. A moment later, I heard a grinding noise and instantly stopped the machine. The arch was an air cushion-based runner, similar to a hovercraft, where the bottom of the arch would always remain slightly above the surface to ensure minimal vibration. so a grinding sound was really, really bad. Upon inspecting the tread, I found a deep crater in the stone surface, maybe 2 to 3 centimeters deep, about an inch, and wide. This was enough for the air cushion to lose pressure, causing the arch to slide over the stone surface of the tread. Further inspection revealed scratches along nearly the entire length of the tread, indicating that the machine had been running with this crater for some time. I immediately shut down the machine and informed Vladimir and my boss that there was a significant issue. Out of my usual caution, I also took time-stamped pictures of the damage. The machine was taken out of commission, the arch had been damaged, the entire stone tread needed reworking, and the machine required recalibration. It was out of service for over a month because of that crater. By the way, the crater looked exactly like the bottom corner of one of the blades, as if one had been dropped onto the stone tread. And the previous shift before mine was, drumroll, Igor's. Of course, he denied any wrongdoing and claimed he didn't recall seeing any scratches or hearing any grinding noise during his shift. He tried to pin the blame on me, but I had reported the issue just 5 minutes into my shift, with the last blade Igor had measured still in the machine. Once again, it was clear who was at fault, but not a single reprimand was directed at him. While the machine was being repaired, we were assigned different tasks. I was placed in the pre-assessment team where the pieces received their initial evaluation. I made some good friends there, which would later serve as my informants. Strike 2 of 3. After the machine was repaired a month later, we had accumulated a massive backlog. The other departments, responsible for repairs, were struggling to find tasks that didn't require measurements. The machine was supposed to operate in 3 shifts, but Antonio had left for his 2-year vacation when the machine was taken out for repairs. The other 2 colleagues, who knew how to operate and maintain the machine, had left for better jobs. So it was just me and Igor by then, with me working quite a bit of overtime for good pay. Setting all issues aside, the hourly wage was really decent. One morning, I noticed something peculiar. The order I had started the previous afternoon was still not finished, with just 2 blades remaining. Every measurement report has a timestamp, which I quickly checked. The measurement cycle for these blades was about 3 minutes plus an additional minute for exchanging one blade for the next. For some reason, the measurement reports from Igor's shift had gaps of 10 to 15 minutes in between, some even half an hour. Since Igor was still around, having just finished the night shift, I approached him. I knew he tended to slack off, but these gaps were unusually long, so I initially thought there might have been trouble with the machine. I asked him if he had encountered any issues with the machine last night, and he curtly replied that everything had been fine. I pressed further, asking if he was certain, and he retorted, asking why I was questioning him. I explained the large gaps between the measurement reports and mentioned that I couldn't find any error messages or sudden stops in the logs. Igor glanced at the timestamps, then back at me, and simply shrugged before heading home. That might have been the end of it, had the next shift on Monday not been even more puzzling. I hadn't worked on Saturday, so Igor had completed 3 shifts since I last clocked out. I came in as usual, performed the maintenance and cleaning, and then checked his progress. 4 orders had been processed since my last shift, so I assumed that, as usual, I would need to compile the reports. But there were none. I was genuinely confused. I searched using the order numbers, checked the machine protocol, and more. The measuring machine had been running all weekend with no shutdown or restart visible in the log, but there were no measurement reports at all. I called in Vladimir, as missing reports for 4 orders was a significant issue. As per protocol, I also informed my boss that the machine was on standby due to technical issues. Both Vladimir and my boss came to the measuring room, and the 3 of us tried to identify the problem. It took a while to figure out, primarily because it was so unexpected. Someone had turned off the output of the machine, perhaps to avoid the timestamps. This caused quite a stir, as all 4 orders had to be measured again with reports, and production was now seriously struggling to find work. Once again, it was clear who was responsible. And finally, Freddy had had enough, but not of Igor. The malicious compliance. That same afternoon, Freddy, the head of the entire assessment department, entered my measuring room. He was dressed in a nice, expensive suit, tie, and polished shoes. Without hesitation, he approached me, blocking my way. I was seated in my chair, compiling the results of the remeasured first order when he towered over me. He looked down and sharply told me he was sick and tired of my bullying of my coworkers. He handed me a letter, which was the signed termination of my contract, bearing his signature. He informed me that I had 2 options. I could either promise to improve, apologize to my coworker Igor, and admit I was at fault, or I would be fired immediately. Having been bullied and terrorized for most of my childhood, I've learned to keep a cool head under stress. So, I resisted my initial urge to argue with him or point out the illegality of his actions. Instead, I took the letter and read through it, nodding a few times. Due to my cold, professional demeanor, I was known for often remaining silent, so he interpreted my nods as compliance. He informed me that he expected my written apology before 2 p.m. All of the bosses typically left by 2 p.m. and came in around 8 or 9 a.m. However, when he turned and confidently strode out with a smug grin, he left me with the termination letter bearing his signature. Fun fact, when both parties agree, a contract can be terminated immediately, without any further obligations, aside from paying for already worked hours, which are processed directly through human resources via the electronic timestamps of our clocking. I had 2 hours left until his deadline, and I used that time to meticulously clean my workspace, make a backup of my work laptop, as per the rules, and then, also in accordance with the rules, completely clear the hard drive. The backup was stored on the designated server with all data correctly named and organized. However, the server for backup data is marked as unsearchable to avoid cluttering your search list. After all, the same part types came in repeatedly with the same material numbers. If you know the rules and where to look, you could find the data within 20 seconds. If not, well, good luck navigating through approximately 10 terabytes of data. I made a copy of the termination paper, now signed by me as well, and sent it to my email, which was permitted, placed the original back into the envelope, and packed up my belongings. Then, I headed to the office, envelope in hand. The big boss flashed his smug smile the moment he saw me, but his expression quickly turned to confusion when he noticed my laptop, work phone, and other items. I handed him the letter, offered a polite nod, and turned to leave. He shouted, asking where I thought I was going, still holding the envelope. "You terminated my contract. According to the rules, I am to return all personal equipment provided by the company before leaving. The exceptions, as per paragraph B, are safety shoes and safety glasses. I wish you a good day, Mr. Freddy," I responded in a cold, calculated tone, doing my best to sound formal, primarily because I knew he detested my professional demeanor. I then approached my direct boss and placed my items on his desk. He looked utterly perplexed, asking what was happening. I briefly informed him that my contract had been terminated and once again cited the relevant rule. My boss, though often arrogant, wasn't entirely clueless. He quickly grasped the gravity of the situation, realizing I was the only person left who truly understood how to maintain and operate the measuring machine. With the existing backlog and other departments already resorting to short-time work due to the lack of measurements, he was at a loss for words. He hurried into Freddy's office to review the termination letter. Meanwhile, I changed into my regular clothes in the locker room and approached the security guards at the gate, requesting a thorough inspection of my person and backpack. This was standard procedure for personnel terminated on short notice. While the guards were initially surprised by my request, they complied. After a thorough search, they provided a written confirmation that I had no company property on me. On my way home, my now ex-boss tried calling me repeatedly. I prefer not to take calls on public transport, so I simply muted them and continued reading my book. Once home, around 4 p.m., well past his usual departure time, I finally answered his call. He attempted to persuade me, suggesting I needed this job and that everything could be sorted out. My response was, "I'll have a new job within a week. You'll need at least a month to train someone new on the machine. That's if you had anyone capable of training a newcomer. Here's my offer. Give me a solid contract with triple the pay and I'll come back. Oh, and I want a written apology from Freddy, as well as peace when working." He argued that my demands were completely unreasonable. I retorted, "So let me get this straight. 3 times I uncover significant issues, 3 times you all attempt to pin the blame on me, and then you literally try to humiliate me to the point where Freddy actually fires me, and you expect me to be reasonable. It seems the reasonable thing to do would be to simply ignore you." I then hung up and blocked his number, as well as any other number he tried to contact me from later on. As I had mentioned earlier, I still had contacts within the company, so I was privy to the ensuing chaos. The facility suddenly found its most sensitive bottleneck further constricted. Without anyone maintaining or cleaning the measuring machine, a precision instrument, it began to malfunction. Vladimir was called in multiple times a day to address issues, which in turn created a backlog for him elsewhere. Tasks that I, or previously Antonio, could have resolved within a minute now took hours, waiting for Vladimir to find the time to come over and fix them. He tried explaining the procedures to Igor, but to no avail. Other departments ran out of work entirely. Naturally, they didn't want to shoulder the blame for missed deadlines, so the issue was escalated up the hierarchy. With no one willing to take responsibility, it climbed higher and higher until it landed on the desk of the national CEO of the company, the highest authority for the company on this side of the Atlantic. I learned this through a friend in HR. What followed was the deployment of the proverbial kill squad, the modern equivalent of executioners, a group of individuals in sharp suits with cold eyes and a mandate to find someone to blame. I even heard that a prosecutor from the USA was among them. A month later, the company contacted me, requesting an interview. Not a job interview, mind you, but a statement regarding the entire affair. While this wasn't a legal proceeding and they couldn't compel me to participate, I willingly complied. I provided a detailed account, being as accurate as possible, and openly admitted any uncertainties or speculations. They thanked me and expressed regret, which seemed genuine, that they couldn't compensate me for my time due to legal constraints. I was content with that and went on my way. Igor was fired for careless negligence, as was his brother Boris. My boss was also let go for mismanagement. However, Freddie, their superior, not only lost his job but was also taken to court. I'm not sure how that played out since it took place in the U.S., but given the nature of the American justice system and the fact that he was made a scapegoat by a global powerhouse, I wouldn't be surprised if he faced severe consequences. The entire facility reported significant losses that year, primarily due to missed contract deadlines, which resulted in hefty daily penalties. My contacts within the company eventually sought new employment opportunities, even those who had been with the company for decades. The last I heard, the company had to contract the manufacturer of the measuring machine to train new employees on its proper operation. I had asked for triple my salary, but the fees they paid these experts had many more zeros. And yes, I did find a new job within a day. I was fired on a Monday, had an interview on Tuesday, and a trial workday on Thursday. By the end of that day, they asked when I could start, which was the following Monday. Now, I handle manual measurements in an incoming quality control department. My boss is fantastic, the team is friendly, and my commute is a mere 18 minutes on an electric scooter. I've been with them for 9 months, and I've already become the de facto team leader for first sample evaluations. Best of all, I'm genuinely appreciated for the work I do. All right, let's unpack this roller coaster of corporate shenanigans. First off, Freddie, my man, you tried to play the big boss game, but it seems like you ended up being the pawn. Maybe next time, before handing out termination letters like they're candy, take a moment to consider who's actually keeping the ship afloat. Just a thought. And Igor? Oh, Igor. The audacity to turn off the machine output and then act like nothing happened? That's some next-level confidence, or maybe just plain ignorance. If you're going to slack off, at least be subtle about it. Pro tip, if you're going to be the workplace slacker, maybe don't pick the most crucial machine in the facility to mess with. Our protagonist, though, smooth moves, cleaning up, backing up data, and then just strolling out like a boss, and that electric scooter exit, iconic. It's like watching someone drop the mic after a killer performance. But on a serious note, this story is a classic example of why communication and appreciation in the workplace are so vital. If you've got someone who's the backbone of an operation, maybe, I don't know, treat them with a bit of respect. And if you're in a position of power, it might be a good idea to actually understand the operations you're overseeing. Just some food for thought. In the end, it's a tale as old as time. Underestimating the quiet, competent ones can be a company's downfall. And to our storyteller, wherever you are, keep riding that scooter with pride. You've earned it. Hey, wait. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And let me know what you would have done if you were in this situation down in the comments below. Anyways, stay safe out there in that crazy world. Much love. Peace.